Well, as I mentioned earlier today, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing for political activist Nancy Abudu, who President Biden in January nominated to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. This is the second highest court system in the United States. Now, over the past 2 months, the Family Research Council and many other conservative organizations have been sounding the alarm on this nominee, who has been working as the strategic litigation director at the disreputable Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, or as I like to call them, the Southern Impoverished Law Center. Several senators asked Ms. Abudu about SPLC's hate list, including the top Republican on the committee, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley.
Would you consider those organizations as a hate group?
Senator, I wouldn't even be able to comment to that because I'm not as familiar with those organizations in terms of the work that they do, their mission, and again, why SPLC profiled them in that way.
Well, joining us now is Senator Chuck Grassley, the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Can you believe that she would say that she doesn't know anything about this? I finished up my questioning with this comment. I said over a period of several years, if you're just reading regular newspaper or commentaries about politics in Washington, D.C. and about your organization, you would know that these organizations has been listed in a very negative way by the center that you work for. And it just doesn't make her answers to my question credible, that she doesn't know that an organization 10 or 15 years ago she was associated with, and now since 2019 associated again, that she didn't know anything about the history of this organization. She's oblivious to these things, but it's not credible that she say that.
Senator, I would have to agree with you. I would find it hard to believe that she would not be familiar with their list ranking all of these conservative groups as hate groups. I would have to question her credibility if she's not aware of a major portion of what that organization does.
Yeah. We're more concerned probably with her filling in details of legislation, putting her personal views into court decisions. If she wants to lean a statute a little bit one way or the other way, or maybe she doesn't believe in the original intent of the Constitution, things of that nature are really bigger than whether she knows this or not, but she hurts her credibility when she says she's oblivious to these accusations by her center on whether or not these Christian organizations are terrorist type organizations or hate organizations, whatever you want to call them.
Well, Senator, let me get to the issue of what you and I have talked about before, and that is judicial philosophy, because that's what we're looking at in these judicial nominees. Are they going to call balls and strikes? Are they just simply going to interpret the law and do their role? I think, and I want to ask you, does she fall into the category of an activist when it comes to her judicial philosophy?
I sure think so. I'm submitting, you only have 5 minutes to ask questions. So I submit a lot of questions for answer in writing, and I'll probably wait until 2 weeks from now when those answers have to be returned to give you a definitive answer. But everything with her background, ACLU, the center she works for now, things of that nature, that's generally the type of person you get from those organizations, that they're very political activists. They believe in big government. They believe that you and I don't know anything, and Washington has all the answers to everything. And Congress is not a democratic organization, small d democratic organization, and it takes a long time to get policy through the Congress of the United States. And boy, it's real easy to get a judge to make a decision that's favorable to you. And remember, 99 9/10% of all the cases are finally decided by circuits, and she's going to be on the 11th Circuit. So she's kind of a Supreme Court, except for about 70 or 80 cases out of the year.
Senator, She's clearly extreme, but she's kind of reflective of what we're seeing from the Biden administration in terms of the type of candidates that he is nominating. And when you look at what we had 4 years ago and the judges that were appointed by the Trump administration that you helped get onto to the bench, and then you look at what President Biden is doing, I actually think that's a really stark contrast that shows the differences, the governing ideological difference between the two parties in our country.
It does, and it goes back to the role of judges in our society. Are they going to be activists? Are they going to be try to be a super legislature? Are they trying to put their views in place of those of the elected representatives of the people? Do they think that they ought to change the law, maybe just a little bit, maybe a lot, but more often just a little bit, instead of deferring to the Congress of the United States? That's basically what's wrong. We have a 6-3 conservative decision on the Supreme Court now, and you're already seeing some benefit from that, from these regulations that are being overturned just because they aren't following the Administrative Procedures Act of 1946 as just one example. So they're saying, these 6 conservatives are saying Congress ought to do its job. And I agree Congress ought to do its job. And I also agree that the courts of the United States ought to have deference to the legislative branch of government, that they should not be a part of it.
So, Senator Grassley, does Ms. Abudu get confirmed?
Well, if her vote was on the floor today with 2 or 3 Democratic senators having COVID and the vice president not also having COVID, not being able to be there, no, she wouldn't be approved. But if there's 50 Democrat votes, I don't want to say that there might not be 2 or 3 Republicans that might vote for her, but for somebody this extreme, sometimes you get all Republicans voting against. And if the vice president's available, she could be approved 51-50. Yes.
Well, speaking of COVID, I want to shift gears because Dr. Anthony Fauci, the president's chief medical advisor, grabbed some headlines by telling PBS NewsHour's Judy Woodruff in an interview that the U.S. is, quote, out of the pandemic phase, end quote. Does that mean that Dr. Fauci's job is over?
I hope so. But which job are you talking about? Are you talking about the job he had when he said we shouldn't wear masks, and then 2 months later we should wear masks? Or the difference between what he says and the CDC says? I'd rather offer to you his job is going to be over when Senator Paul becomes chairman of the health committee and he wants to call Fauci before the committee, and Fauci's going to resign at that point. He doesn't want to go through that with Senator Paul.
Yeah, I saw your comments at a town hall meeting back in Iowa about that recently, where after the November election, if the Republicans are back in the majority, Senator Paul would be chairing that committee. And I think you're absolutely right. I think Dr. Fauci might be looking to retire at that point.
Yeah.
When you look at as we end this pandemic, now he declared it was over, there's still concern about the power that the federal government under the Biden administration, the executive branch, has used with these mandates. Are you concerned that at some point these powers need to be clarified so that we don't begin the next crisis where we left off with this one?
I'm not sure that I could tell you which law the president exercises these emergency powers under. But I do know that there's a 1976 or 1977 law that is very general on what is an emergency. And I joined either Senator Lee or Senator Paul 2 years ago, even when we had a Republican president, that we ought to have some review of that legislation and probably rewrite it and put some guardrails in it of when and how, under what conditions the president exercises his rights. Here's another thought, though, on the subject. Will this emergency be over? once this emergency is over, the president's going to, and his bureaucracy is going to have less authority. And I don't know whether these people can give up that authority once they got it. They going to want to keep it. So even though Fauci says that the pandemic's over, the president's going to have to make that decision. Yes, it is over.
Yeah,
but I think they're going to be hesitant to do that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that's why you've got to do that Congressional Review Act to make sure that they cannot exercise this power again arbitrarily. Senator Grassley, we're out of time. Always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
I'll be glad to join you again if you want me.
Absolutely.